Welcome to the RC Stories Garage. In this episode, we are going to learn how to use mixing to achieve differential steering, also known as tank steering or thrust vectoring, with the Spektrum DX5 Rugged transmitter. This will also work with the newer DX6 Rugged or DX5C or DX6C, as they have the same channel mix options available. From now on, when I mention the DX5 Rugged, I am talking about these other transmitters as well. I will also compare channel mixing with these Spektrum radios to other options. I will be using my Kyosho Blizzard as an example vehicle, but this should work for any tracked vehicle driven by two motors, or even rudderless boats that steer by varying the thrust from two motors. The Kyosho Blizzard tracked vehicles come with a two-stick transmitter, but I switched to a traditional car radio with throttle trigger and steering wheel so I could drive one-handed and film with my other hand. I was also able to move the plow and tiller functions to a 3-position and 2-position switch respectively. This is not an excavator, and the implements are generally either up or down. Let's get started with configuring the DX5 Rugged for tracked vehicle control, and stay tuned later for some bonus tips. I use a Spektrum SR515 receiver in my Blizzard. The channels are set up as follows. Channel 1, or steering, left motor, right track. Channel 2, throttle, right motor, and left track. Auxiliary 1 is the plow blade, auxiliary 2, the tiller, and auxiliary 3, the lights. Note that in the stock configuration, the right track motor has its wire polarity reversed. In a brushless setup, you will need to configure one of the motors to rotate in the reverse direction, which motor depends on the default rotation direction of the brushless ESC. Let's bind the transmitter and receiver so we can continue the initial setup. It is best to have the vehicle on a chassis stand while making changes to the transmitter setup. On my radio, I started by creating a new model. Then, in the Setup menu, scroll to Bind and press OK. Now, while pressing the receiver's bind button, turn on the vehicle power. The receiver LED will blink rapidly, indicating it is in bind mode. Scroll down to Bind, press OK. The transmitter should bind with the receiver. Once the bind operation is complete, the receiver will restart. After the restart, check the track rotation direction. Turn the steering wheel to the left. The right track should rotate forward. Turn the steering wheel to the right. The right track should rotate backward. Pull the throttle and observe the left track rotation. In the case of the Blizzard transmission, the left track rotates backwards. Obviously, this is not what we want, and we need to reverse the throttle output direction. Enter the Setup menu, scroll to Reverse, and press OK. Scroll to Throttle, and press OK. The receiver will tell you to repeat the bind process to recalibrate the failsafe. I'll do that now. Note that now when the throttle is pulled, the left track rotates forward. Note also that the channel monitor bar moves toward negative values for forward and positive values when going backward. Don't get hung up on the negative and positive. Just think of left bar movement as forward and right bar movement as backward. This will be important later. Be aware that the motor direction is completely dependent on the model's motor and gearbox setup. The directional instructions included here may not apply to your vehicle, but the basic channel mixing setup will. The DX5 Rugged has two built-in steering mixes, dual servo steering and four-wheel steering. Unfortunately, these mixes cannot be combined with throttle input or output in a meaningful way. The built-in steering mixes always output to channel 1, steering, and an auxiliary channel. We cannot output the steering mix to channels 1 and 2, nor can we redirect the throttle input to channel 1 and an auxiliary channel. In transmitter terms, a mix is a configuration that defines how input values are sent to an output channel. Logically, there is a hidden built-in mix that takes throttle input and sends it to channel 2 output. The DX5 Rugged allows you to create exactly one custom mix. We will use this custom mix to duplicate the throttle input to channel 1, so that both motors receive the throttle signal. It might be a good idea to do the initial mix setup with the vehicle powered off. We can use the channel monitor to see the effect of our mix without actually running the vehicle. Enter the Setup menu, scroll down to Mixing, and press OK. Scroll down to Mix 0 and press OK. Scroll down to Master, press OK, scroll to Throttle, and press OK. Scroll to Slave, press OK, scroll to Steering, and press OK. The rate is defined as 2 percentages. Think of each rate as a multiplier of the input. The first percentage applies when the master input is moved in one direction, for example, throttle pull, and the second percentage applies when the master input is moved in the opposite direction, for example, throttle push. We are going to keep the left and right percentages equal. The rate defaults to 0%, 0%. That is, when the throttle trigger is moved, nothing happens to the steering output. We need to change the rate, but to what? Remember, when we pull the throttle trigger, the throttle output bar moves left toward negative values. We need the same to happen with the steering output. Forward throttle input should move the steering output toward negative values. To achieve this, we need to set negative rates for the mix. Scroll to Rates, press OK, scroll to negative 100%, negative 100%, and press OK. The switch setting should be set to On. This means Mix 0 is active. Mix 0 can also be activated with a physical switch, but that does not make sense in our use case. The trim setting determines whether or not trim values from the master are applied to the slave. I set this to Inhibit so I can fine-tune the left and right track neutral positions independently. We've now completed the basic mix setup. Press Back or scroll up to Menu and press OK to return to the main mixing screen. Pull the throttle trigger and note that the steering and throttle channel bars move left or forward in unison. Push the throttle trigger and the steering and throttle channel bars move right or reverse in unison. Great! Leave the throttle trigger in the center position and turn the steering wheel. Note that only the steering channel bar moves left or right. Now, pull the throttle halfway and then turn the steering wheel. Note again that the steering channel bars move left and right relative to the throttle bar. The vehicle will turn left or right by slowing down one motor, and it will turn in the other direction by speeding up the same motor. To maintain a constant speed, you will have to feather the throttle up and down while you turn. At full throttle, you will only be able to turn in one direction. To turn in the other direction, you will need to ease off the throttle slightly. The same is true of two-stick steering. Your brain will adapt. This is the limitation of tank mixing on the DX5 Rugged. It's time to turn on your vehicle and test out the mix. Again, it's best to have the vehicle on a stand for this. Depending on your vehicle, if either the throttle or the steering are going in the wrong direction, you may need to adjust motor wire polarity for brushed motors, the ESC rotation direction for brushless motors, the transmitter reverse settings, or the mix zero rate, positive versus negative setting. That's it for the basic setup. If you like, you can do some fine tuning. If your vehicle is not tracking straight, or in the case of tracked vehicles, the left and right tracks are not starting at the same time, you might need to adjust the trim of either or both the steering and throttle channels. Starting straight and staying straight seem to be antithetical propositions, so you might not achieve perfection here. If steering or startup seem twitchy, then try adding a positive exponential value to one or both inputs. An exponential or expo curve means that the input and output will not have a linear or one-to-one relation. Instead, you will have more input sensitivity at low speeds and less sensitivity at high speeds. I have also experimented with dialing down the steering travel endpoints. It would be a rare thing to want to spin a tracked vehicle at full throttle. Fun, but not very scale-looking. However much you reduce the steering travel, you have to increase the mix rate. For example, when setting the steering travel to 80% and the mix rate to 125%, pulling the throttle outputs the same value to the left and right tracks, but now the steering is more subdued. By the way, minus 125% and plus 125% are the minimum and maximum mix rate values available. All of this is to say that you can use any combination of tools to fine-tune the throttle and steering control to your liking. Once out on the snow, the Blizzard drives fine with the DX5 Rugged transmitter. Certainly no worse than with the two-stick transmitter, which has no exponential control. There are two simple tips for smoother steering with the DX5 Rugged. 1. Increase throttle to maintain speed when turning right. And 2. Decrease throttle to maintain speed when turning left. In an ideal scenario, our transmitter would have two custom mixes. One to copy the throttle output to the steering channel, and one to invert steering input from the right track to the left track. But with the DX5 Rugged, we are only given one custom mix. An alternative that I have seen but not personally tried is to use an electronic channel mixing device, variously referred to as a V-wing mixer or aileron mixer, because they are used in aircraft without tail wings and mix the elevator and aileron functions. How does a V-wing mixer work? The receiver's steering and throttle outputs are connected to the mixer, and it outputs exactly the mix we want to two control devices, in our case, motor ESCs. I'm not an aircraft guy and have had trouble sourcing an electronic mixer locally. Let me know in the comments if you can recommend an online retailer for such a device. The other alternative, of course, is to use a surface radio that has more mixing options. I recently ordered a Radiomaster MT12 4-in-1 transmitter, and the first vehicle I set up was my Kyosho Blizzard. Setting up the mixes is dead simple when following the excellent quick tutorial of Armin RC. I will put a link in the description below. The benefit of the MT12 multi-radio is that it works with the Spektrum receivers I already have in most of my vehicles. The downside is that I can't steer one-handed with the MT12. This issue will be solved with either a 3D printed or shop-made thumb steer adapter. Another advantage of the MT12 is the logical switches and special function features of the EDGETX operating system. With these, I am able to automatically switch to a more aggressive exponential curve when I lower either of the Blizzard's implements. If you are into geeky things, I highly recommend the Radiomaster MT12. Just read the manual several times to familiarize yourself with the features, terminology, and logical pathways. I might actually do a video on this very topic, kind of a MT12 for Dummies overview. Let me know in the comments if this would be of interest to you. As you can see, it is possible to achieve two-motor tracked vehicle steering with a DX5 Rugged transmitter. For this use case, I would say that the limited functionality provided by Spektrum's Mix Zero is 90% as effective as the full-blown solutions provided by a transmitter with a better mixing capabilities. And to me, that's totally fine if you are already using a DX5 Rugged for multiple vehicles. On the other hand, I really wish Spektrum had added a few additional custom mixes to the updated DX6 transmitters. I've also used DX5 Rugged channel mixing for winch control on my rock crawlers. I'll link to that series in the description. And if you are interested, I recently upgraded my Kyosho Trail King tracked vehicle to brushless with two Hobbywing Fusion Mini 16 motors. That video link is on the screen now or in the description. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this video useful and would like to see more of this type of content. And leave a comment below if you have questions about channel mixing or have a suggestion or request for other tech-related videos. Stay warm and keep the trackside down.